Pasquale Tallarico Band. Good morning. Tomorrow is the Feast of the Divine Mercy. 10 years ago, on the vigil of this great feast, Pope John Paul II, now St. John Paul the Great, was called home to the Lord. This great man who taught us so much about the dignity of the human person during his 26-plus years of pontificate gave us perhaps the greatest lesson in the value of the human person in his own personal example, as he aged with great illness and suffering right up until that final night. He gave us an example of dying with dignity. My name is Mark McElrath, and I chair the Board of Regents here at Servite High School. I'll be serving as your Master of Ceremonies. It is my absolute privilege to participate in this most important conference, which will address matters pertaining to proposed legislation currently before the California State Assembly, SB 128. Today we'll hear from scholars, theologians, philosophers, psychiatrists, physicians, nurses, and everyday ordinary people like you and I, who are witnessing to the dignity of human life by the way they embrace the difficulty of their lives. Thank you for taking time from your busy life to be with us today to learn, to share, to discuss, to pray, and to organize so as to defeat this legislation, and in so doing to help people come to understand that each and every human life is a gift and that suicide is never an answer to what may seem at the time overwhelming difficulties. For those who will be tweeting, the hashtag today is #DignityAndCourage, and the live stream is www.occatholic.com/stream. This conference was convened by and is sponsored by Bishop Kevin Vann of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange. His leadership in this area is not only timely, but courageous. This is not a popular topic. It's not easy to discuss. Yet it is the critical topic for the benefit of the common good. And now I ask you to join me in welcoming our host, Bishop Kevin Vann.
Brothers and sisters all, during this season of the resurrection of the Lord, I wish to welcome all of you here, all of those who are part of the local Church of Orange, but all of our brothers and sisters in faith from our evangelical communities and others who are with us, joining in this bond of common concern for the human person, and to be those who are sent forth to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. The involvement of the Diocese of Orange in this day is really part of a larger group called Californians Against Assisted Suicide. And you will be hearing from some of those folks today. So it is a wide group of concern around our state with individuals who have a great love of humanity, and especially those who are in the most disadvantaged, or I would say marginal parts of our society. I'm going to reflect just briefly a bit and have a short prayer, and then I have to go to St. Irenaeus in Cyprus for confirmation. It's the time of the year for that celebration, and then I'll be back after that for most of the rest of the day. I would say, friends, that probably the last perhaps 2.5 years of my own life have really been some of the most significant in my life and ministry, and some of you have been through some of this, journeying with my own mother and father in their last days. My mother passed away from Parkinson's disease in June of 2012, shortly before I came here, and my father of the same just this past November. And so after my mother passed away, I spent a lot of time going back and forth to Illinois, trying to help my sister and the rest of my siblings support and love our father, and to help him. I mean, after all, they gave everything for us. I believed, that it was our turn to do the same for Dad especially. He and my mother were married 62 years, and after her death, he was still grieving really all of these years. I happened to be with him just almost a year ago, this past June, when I flew back home to Springfield because he was having hernia surgery. Now, hernia surgery in itself is minor, but it's when on someone who's nearly 90, it is a big concern. So as he was being prepped for surgery, one of the nurses asked, "Oh, did you know Mrs. Van?" He goes, "Well, yeah, that was my wife. My mother was a clinical instructor." And after all these years, Dad said, "You know," he said, "she was a real doll." That's what he said about my mother, even all these years after that. And Dad did fine in the surgery, but life was still a challenge for him, but he was supported by the community of neighbors around him and his parish and many people of all different faiths who wanted to see that Bill was taken care of and that Bill would have a quality life. And we did pretty well until last November, right after the 1st of November, somewhere around there. Dad had to go back in for more regulation of things, and he just wasn't doing okay. But then he went home, and then my sister called me one day, and she goes, "Kevin," she goes, Dad is screaming." Well, he was screaming in pain because with Parkinson's, he had ischemia of the bowel, and it just had all kind of quit working. So I flew back, and I was wonderfully supported by everybody here. So in all that, my father made the decision himself to go into hospice care at St. John's Hospital in Springfield, Illinois. He made that decision with us around him. And so thanks to the palliative and the hospice care at St. John's Hospital in Springfield, Illinois, he was pain-free. His anxiousness left. And we were able to surround him with our love and our presence as he journeyed to the Lord with the compassion of those around him and the care of those around him. So the Lord could come and embrace him and he could go home to him. And my brothers and my sister and others were all with him on midnight of November the 13th when he went home. And Dad was a World War II vet. And I said, and he was in the Navy during the Second World War. And I said, "Okay, Dad," I said, "set sail, anchors away, Mama's waiting, go." And he did. And we all were kind of reflecting on that at that moment. And what I had written about, some of you may have read it, that when I was sitting with Dad, I was just the next building over from where he had waited for me when I was to be born in 1951. All these circumstances of life. But as I was there on the hospice unit, there were a number of folks being well taken care of, but there was nobody there. So in the process of all this, I thought, who speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves? Where is an act of mercy and justice in all this? So brothers and sisters, we are now united here in our state with so many people of goodwill to go about the work of justice and be a voice for the voiceless, those who cannot really defend themselves and those who need help at the end of their life, to be pain-free, but to be able to freely choose life. We are in a prophetic role these days, and a role of compassion, and a role of caring, because we know from our experience in the Northwest and overseas that however well-intentioned these bills may be at some point, soon whatever quote-unquote safeguards are put around them, and those are all artificial, they all fall away. And those who cannot care themselves or who have no insurance or whatever have soon become victims in this, to have their life ended when they do not want it. So we are icons, we are missionaries to go out and proclaim the dignity and the worthwhile of every human being. And to do that in these days ahead, especially by engaging ourselves with this process in every level, in the state, in every place, but by telling others about this, informing others. Come, see and know and be with us in this struggle for life, in this struggle to defend the defenseless and to give a voice to the voiceless for their lives. I pray that God bless us this day, and I thank you all for being here and spread the word and be missionaries of human life and the dignity of the human being, especially at the end of their life, so that they may know that a loving community surrounds them, that they are pain-free, and that the question who decides will not be theirs to do, but in fact that they know of our love and our prayers, that truly to know in the end who is the ultimate author and life to whom we all must go. Thank you very much, and may God bless us this day.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Words that not only bless us but inspire us. Father Robert Spitzer is a Catholic priest in the Jesuit order and is currently the president of the Magis Center of Reason and Faith. The Magis Center produces documentaries, books, high school curricula, college courses, and adult education curricula, which shows the close connection between faith and reason in contemporary astrophysics and the historical study of the New Testament. Father Spitzer is past president of Gonzaga University, has a PhD in philosophy, 3 master's degrees, and if I continue with the CV, I'll be here all morning. Here to speak with us about the dignity and courage at the end of life, please welcome Father Robert Spitzer.
Thanks, Mike. Just get me to that podium there.
There we go.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with all of you this morning. I just want to thank Bishop Kevin Van once again for his leadership in this issue, because without him, honestly, I think we would have a much slower start on an issue which demands even a quicker one. So thank you very much, Bishop Van. I have 20 minutes to describe 3 fundamental principles that are involved in this issue. I can't clear my throat in 20 minutes, but I'll give it a good try. The key elements that are involved here, first of all, there are a lot of people out there saying that the Catholic Church is somehow trying to take away freedoms from people in society. The Catholic Church has much more to do than take away people's freedoms for no good reason. There's a very good reason for this, as we'll see in a moment. And the reason is because 3 huge populations of people are going to be very affected by this. It's going to be a new freedom for some people, true, but the onerous burden that it will create for a group of other people is truly going to become a duty to die, and we'll talk about it in just a moment. Before I begin, I just want to take 2 quick fundamental issues that are not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with physician-assisted suicide. So the bill before the Senate is assisted suicide. It's not about death with dignity. This is not about not taking extraordinary means. This is not about turning off ventilators. This is not about refusing some machines or some means that you don't want to have. This is not about prolonging life with onerous and costly burdens. It's not about anything like that. It's about giving people medications to commit suicide with. And we're saying as a church that this is highly problematic. And I'm joined, I know, by many of the evangelical churches as well, who are, and Protestant churches as well, who are very committed to these principles that I'll be speaking about. Let me just get to the first principle, the first red herring, as it were. This is not about also, oh, by the way, for Catholics, very clearly, there is a wide range of treatments and ways that you can choose to deal with your life if you've been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And these are set out very clearly by the California Catholic Conference. So if you just go to cacatholic.org, you will see all the various methods and things that you can avail yourself of at the end of life. So we're not talking about this at all. Catholics are very free to choose a wide variety of ways of dealing with terminal illness. The second red herring is about pain. Right now, we can see the Hemlock Society changing their viewpoint. And by the way, the Hemlock Society has renamed itself Compassion and Choices. So that it's just a rename, same organization for sure. The key thing, though, with the Hemlock Society or Compassion Choices is they're moving from looking at dying or in writhing pain now to the indignity of death. For the moment, though, I just want to say 2 things that you're going to hear a lot about in a moment. The first is the vast majority of pain associated with terminal illness, according to the Washington Medical Association, and now according to the American Medical Association, can be dealt with very effectively at the time terminal illness is diagnosed. In this regard, hospice that Bishop Van just talked about is very, very good in the administration of these kinds of pain protocols, pain and symptom management protocols. So that is really not a reason. Even euthanasia advocates say pain is no longer a reason to request assisted suicide. The second thing, clearly, too, is depression. The vast majority of depression also can be treated right in the time of terminal illness. And again, hospice is really excellent at this. Of course, you can get these kinds of depression protocols too from your physician and other people, but hospice is really very good at it. Last but not least, it's important to know that suicide requests, the vast majority of the time, according to Dr. Kathleen Foley, who did an extensive study of all this in the Journal of Pain and Symptom Management, says very clearly the vast majority, over 90% of suicide requests are reversed when pain and depression can be adequately treated. But pain and depression can be adequately treated. Therefore, the vast majority of suicide requests would be reversed if we just did the right thing, because people want to live. People don't want to die. People don't want to commit suicide. People don't freely want to do this if they're not in pain, if they're not depressed. They really do want to live. And so, of course, I think this is the group, the vulnerable group who can be pushed into suicide. This is who we're trying to defend. Very quickly, let's go to principle number. I'm just going to go through these three principles very quickly with you. Principle number one is this is going to affect the whole disabilities community. Principle, and we as Christians, we should be defending the disabilities community for sure. Number two, this is going to affect what I'm going to call a huge group of vulnerable populations, specifically those who can be pressured, those who are depressed, those who are suggestible, those who are poor. These are really groups who will be very, very affected by this legislation in order to give this new freedom to commit suicide. And then third area is the culture. Our culture is going to be very adversely affected by this legislation. We will move concertedly, just like Holland, toward a culture of death. And the darkness of that culture of death really holds less light, less hope, not only for our kids, but for every single member of our society that's dependent upon the ideals, the principles that are enshrined by that culture. So this is really a disaster area. Let's go through each one very, very quickly. Principle number one, our obligation to just work with those who are disabled, because, of course, Jesus, whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers and sisters, you do unto me, right? The idea here is that we are not, because somebody has a disability, and I certainly have a disability with respect to my eyes, we don't become less human, less worthwhile because of a disability. Christianity, Jesus Christ has always held that, dealing with, suffering, dealing with challenge bravely is what's part of our lives. That's what we're meant to do. We're not, to turn tail, run, commit suicide, and hold out this example as the example of hope for our kids, which, of course, is anti-hope. Now, here is the problem. The Hemlock Society, as I said, has moved its kind of advertising campaign from one of, pain, dying in pain, to one of the indignity of having to ask for assistance. And Marilyn Golden, who is very much a disability rights advocate, writes about this all the time. That what's happening now is there is a branding of disabilities. There is a branding of the quality of life of the disabled. If you need assistance, there's something wrong with that. And now the branding has gone from something wrong with needing assistance to the indignity of needing assistance. And now the branding, because in order to push, assisted suicide, you got to make it undignified to need assistance. And finally you get to the point where you have to say, suicide is better than this indignity of needing assistance. I mean, we've come totally around the bend on the dignity of the disabled. We have become a culture that's going to become intolerant of the disabled, with the strong suggestion that suicide is better than enduring your life. Now, when you think about the fact that 99% of the work in this culture is done by people who don't feel 100% well, yikes, this is really something difficult, right, to deal with. We all have challenges. We all have suffering. We're all not perfect. We all need one another. There's nothing wrong with needing people. And that's got to change. But the more we push the suicide agenda, the more we have to say that there is something wrong with needing people. It is an indignity to need assistance. If you have to have some assistance to go to the bathroom, commit suicide. It's just better. Of course we laugh at it, but that's the implication, says Marilyn Golden, and I think she's right on the marker. Second principle, really quickly. There is an old legal maxim. It's called the intrinsic limit of human freedom. Goes back to the time of John Locke and to the time of Baron de Montesquieu and others. But this principle basically goes like this. It's great to have a society that has freedoms available, but freedoms are not completely unrestricted. In John Locke's words, my freedom to exercise the swing of my fist leaves off where your nose begins. In short, then, you can't be taking away freedoms from others to give freedoms. And you certainly can't impose onerous burdens on people to give freedoms to others. It's not just Locke. It's not just Montesquieu. It's emblazoned in our common law. It's part of our philosophy of law. It's part of the principles upon which our country was founded. You can't give freedoms to one group that are going to impose onerous burdens on another group. Onerous burdens, well, what onerous burden could be associated with this issue? The duty to die. Right now, vulnerable populations don't have to deal with the pressure to die, the duty to die. But if this legislation is passed, there is going to be a new, really onerous burden, namely the burden to die, which is going to be placed on a huge group of vulnerable people. For example, who? Anyone who can be pressured by relatives or friends or physicians to commit suicide when they otherwise would not want to. I just have the case of Kate Cheney here, but she's just one of many, many examples that have been reported since the time of the passage of the Oregon Bill. For example, with Kate Cheney, right, her mother went into her physician to ask for a prescription for a lethal medication for her to commit suicide with. The doctor said, I know your mother. She doesn't want to commit suicide. I've been treating her for years. I refuse to write this prescription. And so, of course, he sent the daughter packing. But she was very aggressive. She went out, found another physician finally who would write the prescription for assisted suicide. And lo and behold, a few days later, Mom was dead by her own hand. But I mean, pressured? I think pressured, no question, if her first physician's diagnosis or beliefs were correct. Second area vulnerable population. I think this, has to do with people who are basically people who are open to suggestion from relatives and friends. They have fragile egos. They have a fragile sense of self-worth. And, so even, a son or a daughter could innocently, walk in and say, well, Mom, the doctor wants me just to tell you about your choices. You have the choice, to get aid in dying or the choice to have a pain protocol. Well, dear, what does aid in dying mean? Well, that's assisted suicide, Mom. Now, it might seem innocuous that you're just presenting an option, but anybody who works in the healthcare business knows, hey, you just can't innocently suggest suicide to people. They might think that you want them to do this. And if they think that, then they may also think in the same breath that it is better to die because my son is saying, I would be better off dead as far as he's concerned. He really isn't telling me to take the pain protocol. He's telling me, here's an option, and they take the hint. Do they want to commit suicide? No. I think the suggestible, most of the time, if Dr. Kathleen Foley is correct, the suggestible don't want to commit suicide. They just feel depressed that nobody cares enough to say, Mom, I'd prefer that you would take the pain protocol rather than assisted suicide. But eliminate the risk. Why give the option for assisted suicide? It just pressures that whole population. Then the depressed. I don't have to tell you. It's not just clinically depressed people or people who are depressed because of changes that are taking place as they get older. It's the depression that comes with the mere diagnosis of terminal illness. Since the time of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death and dying, depression has been integral and recognized in the dying process as a very natural thing. But depression is reversible, ladies and gentlemen. If you treat it properly, it is reversible. The depression that comes when terminal illness is diagnosed can be reversed. And when it is reversed, people want to live. The idea of rushing in and administering a lethal dose, self-administering a lethal dose of medication under pressure, because you feel depressed at the moment, is completely an erroneous viewpoint of what human people really want in their last hour. What they want in their last hours is to be loved, not to be given the option to die. The point is vulnerable population. The poor are also going to be a vulnerable population. They're the ones that are not going to be able to afford the good insurance. And so you're going to have 2 kinds of insurance. You're going to have the insurance that people, I call the minimum kind, which, of course, in Oregon is a state-run fund. And then you can have, a good kind, which might treat you for your cancer, treat you for your disease, and give you an adequate pain protocol. The case of Barbara Wagner is significant, just one of many in the state of Oregon, right, where she has, cancer. And her insurance company, funded by the Oregon State Plan, her insurance company writes to her and says, well, we will not pay for your treatment and your pain protocol, but we will pay for your assisted suicide. And Barbara Wagner's response was, I couldn't believe it. They won't pay for me to live, but they'll pay for me to die? Be careful. Because what we're doing is creating a double-strated system. And the double-strated system is going to come back to haunt us. One group gets, the full range of treatment. The other group, they'll pay for the assisted suicide. Goodbye, get out of our hair. So I think, again, we see vulnerable populations. The depressed, the suggestible, the poor, those who are pressured, etc. This is really a big problem, and we just can't ignore it. But let me get to the third principle that's involved here. The third principle is, as Christians, we have a responsibility to our culture. And what I just want to suggest is one big, huge, important principle we have to remember. You know, what becomes legal becomes socially acceptable. And what becomes socially acceptable soon becomes moral, ethical, because everybody's doing it. The point I'm trying to get to is the churches for many, many years had vast influence on the culture, as well they should, as people who hold out principles and virtues that inspire people to reach for the highest kind of life. But the media doesn't own the culture and shouldn't. The legal establishment shouldn't own the, neither should the political establishment, and neither should the public education establishment. We as church people, we as people who represent organizations and NGOs that are trying to affect the principles and virtues of this culture to reach for the highest standards should also be influencing the culture. But back to the key thing, what becomes legal becomes socially acceptable, and what becomes socially acceptable soon becomes moral. Once we do this, we now darken the culture. We move it toward a culture of death. If you legalize suicide, as in Holland, if we do this, what will happen is that people will begin to think it's socially acceptable. And as they do this, they'll think it's moral and ethical. And as they do that, the rate of suicide will steadily increase every year, as it has in Holland. And as it steadily increases every year, it's going to become more and more accessible. Today in Holland, they have the mobile euthanasia units that go around with 2 nurses in it. And if you just need to commit suicide right now, you can get the wagon to do a home delivery and, of course, hold your hand while you commit suicide, write the death certificate, all done. This is crazy, if I might say so. Yes, I'm sorry. I will wind it up at this juncture. The key thing that I would want to suggest is that if we continue this cultural trend, we will undermine not just the sacredness of life, but the goodness of life. We will begin to create a dark culture where suicide is more important than dealing bravely and dealing with love and compassion in the lives not just of our elderly, but of our young terminally ill people as well. We will begin to give the clue to our children that suicide is an acceptable option for dealing with life. And what then, when suicide has become just as much of an option as love and compassion and courage and virtue? What then, when suicide has become just as much of an we will be nothing more than the stoic Roman culture that imploded under its own cruelty. We can do better than this. I just would suggest, please, go onto that website, cacatholic.org, and just hit that button that says, urge no against suicide. Work in your parishes, work in your churches, work in your organizations to reverse what I think is the great darkening, not only of our culture, but the great darkening of the souls within it. Thank you so very, very much.